Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Watier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Watier, and I'm here, as always, with my good friend and colleague, Tommy Welling. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Doing fantastic, my friend. Excited for today's conversation, stemming from a couple of social media posts on Instagram of follows that I enjoy. We are going to once and for all take on the who wins, the calorie in, calorie out model, the AK eat less, move more, versus the carb-insulin model of obesity, which means it's your insulin and your hormones. Mm-hmm. And we're going to bury the lead for just a minute and dangle the carrot, but we're going to break it down in a fasting for life adaptation. It's going to be a fun conversation talking about why diets fail and the actual physiology of how you lose fat. But most importantly, how you apply that to your fasting lifestyle to lose the weight, regain the energy, prevent disease, reverse disease, whatever it is that you're trying to do with your fasting efforts to improve your day-to-day and get the results of long-term weight loss and health that you truly deserve. So if you are new to the podcast, welcome in. It's going to be a fun one. You want to know more about why we do what we do week in and week out, head back to episode 0, episode 1, give it a listen, give you some insight into our mindsets, Tommy's transformation, my transformation, why we have the challenges, the coaching, the resources on the website, and why we do an episode week in and week out, because we are on this Fasting for Life journey with you. Also, shout out to the OGs, the Fasting for Lifers. Thank you so much for continuing to be on this journey with us. And just excited about today's conversation, Tommy.
Yeah, me too, because this is one of those ones where it can also be the reason why you haven't tried fasting before, or like if you think back to pre-fasting, before you ever started a fasting timer, or even thought about, hey, maybe I should just restrict the timing.
Maybe a chronic dieter.
Yeah, you might have a history, and you might have a history with counting calories or counting macros, or maybe not. But either way, just the idea that calories in, calories out kind of encapsulates all that you need to know and understand and then control and leverage in order to get a hold of what's going on the scale, lose some fat that you'd like to lose. Even just that oversimplification can be the reason why it didn't feel justifiable to change your eating windows or to look at time as an actual factor, because if a calorie is just a calorie, then why should the timing matter? Why should compartmentalizing or putting any sort of structure behind a time restriction of my eating or my nutrition, why should that matter? It shouldn't matter. So then that can be a reason that actually keeps you feeling stuck and you keep going back to the same method, even though it may not be working very well, or may be working less well over time. And then ultimately, you might need a high level of frustration or some other sort of aha moment that kind of brings you over the edge to actually go, you know what, let me just try this intermittent fasting thing, even though it probably won't work because I'm already counting calories, right?
So I promised we weren't going to bury the lead. So calories in, calories out versus hormones. The debate's finally over. Here's who won. Neither or both.
Right.
Now, when I saw these two posts and I kind of started thinking, and I sent them to you, you're like, what are we going to do with this? Is this a good conversation? This is really like where we love to live at Fasting for Life in the nuance. So one of the posts was from Anant Agarwal, and it was why diets fail, right? And he talks about cutting calories and eating less and losing weight, and your metabolism becomes more efficient, right? That metabolic adaptation that happens when you hit a plateau and the cravings go up and the hunger goes up and your energy wanes and you're on or off your consistency with your lifestyle, right? So calories matter and hormones matter too. Mm-hmm. They both matter because hormones are what are the outputs of the inputs. So insulin sensitivity, protein intake, muscle mass, sleep, stress, right? So when we were looking at this, I'm like, yeah, this is the crux of the issue, is it's not a one size fits all. And you and I have decades of experience in this failing forward type, losing the weight, getting the weight off, until we consistently adapted a fasting lifestyle, right? Because calories in, calories out is an easy way of saying when you take in more energy than you burn, you gain weight. When you take in less energy than you burn, you lose weight. Right. But if it was that simple, then why do the results not show?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just because we're all non-compliant, craving-filled beings?
Lying about what we're doing?
Right. And the answer is no. So it's interesting that in that post about the calories in, calories out is not the whole truth, you will see an entire online, rock fight of people going back and forth about who's right and who's wrong. And the answer is both.
Yeah.
Right? So you'll see the posts saying like, no, it's only math, or no, you're not tracking properly, or oh, you're not moving enough.
You're giving up personal responsibility.
Yeah, there's no personal responsibility if you're going to blame something else, right? And there's some legitimacy to all of those arguments on both sides of the aisle.
Mm-hmm.
So I love this conversation because most importantly from us, we want you to find something that's sustainable and that keeps you motivated, not all of the time, but most of the time, and that you're seeing the results that you want.
I think that a good way to look at it is when it's talked about as far as calories in, calories out, it's looked at it as a very, very simple chemistry equation.
Yeah, math
very
equation.
Simple. Yeah, very simple chemistry experiment to within a highly controlled set of variables. But what's missing is just the rest of the equation. So calories in, calories out, thermodynamically is correct, but what about the time aspect of it? So what controls the timing of the burning of those calories? What also controls the buckets? Like if a calorie is stored within the body, where is it going? What sort of cellular process, what sort of tissue is it building? Is it building out the fat stores, or is it building out your musculoskeletal system? Or is it going to increase bone density? Or is it going somewhere else for repair purposes? Based on the immune response. So there's or some other sort of trauma within the body. So there are other decisions to be made biochemically within the body that have to account for some of the variation. But then you also have the speed of the processes. And so where some of those decisions are made are actually in the proportion of the different macronutrient groups. So carbohydrates versus fat versus protein. Because you could take one meal and you can vary the proportions of protein, fats, and carbohydrates, and then that will, in and of itself, that will completely
change the equation.
It will change the equation. So you don't even have to put it within a different body. You can just take different foods or just change the proportion of the same foods, and you can have a different outcome, even in a highly controlled environment. So that's where the hey, it's as simple as calories in, calories out. It already starts to break down, as that's not taking into account most of the picture. It's thermodynamically correct. So many missing pieces from that oversimplification zone.
And here's the central idea of the conversation today is that fat loss is a hormonal process, not just eat less and move more. Mm-hmm. Fasting is one of the best tools that we found to fix the hormonal environment so that the calorie equation can work better for you. So why we see fasting, right? Why it stacks the deck in your favor from a calorie standpoint and from a hormonal standpoint, right? So if counting calories and 1,200 calorie plans, and I don't believe that all of us need to hire a nutritionist, right, to be able to lose weight. Like, I don't think that's a requirement, or a coach, right? Yes, we all need coaching at certain points in our life. Our coaching, and that's kind of ironic for us to say because we have a coaching program and we have challenges and all these different things, but it's designed to give you the tools for then you to go transition into an intuitive eating fasting machine, right, that can reach maintenance and maintain that and become the 5% that loses the weight and increases their metabolic health long term, and not fall back into that 95% of people that gain the weight back and end up having to restart, right? So, when we're looking at this, the equation component, and then I want to talk a little bit about the actual physiology of fat loss, because it's not a light switch, right? It's not like decrease calories, because that time component that you mentioned, On the left side of the factors that influence energy balance, we've got appetite, right? So you've got your hunger hormones that regulate your appetite and satiety, and then that's linked to low levels of inflammation and HSCRP and how it binds to leptin and all these different things. You've got your food consumed, so you've got the obesogenic food environment, the convenient ultra-refined processed foods, the palatability, the hedonic food scale. Then you've got the calories absorbed from the macronutrient intake, right, on your health status and energy status and where you're at. And then you've got the psychological factors, sleep and stress. I put those together into sleep and stress and mindset and self-esteem and perceived, confidence levels. And then on the outside of the calorie in, calorie out model, you have the energy burned at rest. So where's your BMR? What's your body doing as a baseline energy burn, as a furnace burning that energy throughout the day? And then you've got the one that the calorie in, calorie eat less, move more puts a lot of stock into, which is the energy burn through exercise, right? So it's move more, increase your steps, right? And then you'll make the equation stem in your favor. Well, the problem is that category is such a small percentage of your daily caloric burn. So we want to focus more on the other bigger lever that you can pull, which is the non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So this is your daily movement patterns. We're sitting more than ever before. We're more sedentary than ever before. And then the last component of that energy out intake is the energy burned by the metabolization of your food. So prioritizing protein is going to increase your burn rate compared to carbohydrates and fat.
Yep.
So there's this, like if you think of those balance scales that you see like on Law and Order, right? I think they have those old balance scales, right?
Yeah.
We have all of those things, so if you're looking at this from a broader perspective, and it's both. Calories matter, but also your sleep and stress and your hormonal state matter. The output side of it matters as well. And I think something that's missing is in this, we like to say fat loss versus weight loss. And if anyone that's gone low carb or started being consistent with their intermittent fasting efforts, you're going to see that scale move quickly or see big deltas on a day-to-day basis based on your glycogen and your hydration and the whoosh, right? When the scale finally rewards you.
Yeah, it can accelerate that water weight change.
Yeah, but fat loss isn't a single step. So this was the post that I saw from Bill Campbell, PhD. Awesome follow. Do we actually really understand what happens to our fat and that there's a time component and some of the lab changes that you'll see when you start fasting and losing some weight? So there's the fat cell, right? The adipocyte, right? Basically, it's a triglyceride. This is what fills up 95% of our fat cells, and it's what we need to remove and burn for fat loss. But we don't actually lose them. We don't remove them. They just shrink. Right? So imagine you got a kid's birthday party and you've got a big thing of helium-filled balloons. Right? On day one, they're big, they're 10-inch balloons, they're full, they're floating. And then picture, after you've lost some weight, after you've had them in the house for a few days, they start to shrink. The number of balloons didn't go away unless your dog or kid popped them, right?
Yeah.
You still have the same number of balloons, but they've gotten smaller. So we don't reduce the actual number of our fat cells. We shrink them. So when they get smaller, we lose body fat. So what happens to the triglycerides? Well, gets a little technical, but oxygenation, we lose most of our fat through a two-step process of lipolysis, which is the breakdown of that triglyceride or that fatty acid, and then it gets oxidized, and we actually breathe it out. So we lose fat through our breath. It's really cool. That's why the Lumen device has been, trotted out by a lot of the influencers out there. You'll see Lumen, knowing where you are in terms of this process. So we release the fatty acid from the fat cell, so it enters the bloodstream so we can burn it as energy. That's the lipolysis, right? And then it breaks it down through a series of enzymatic processes, and then we breathe it out. Well, once you get that energy in the bloodstream and it's floating around, what's going to control taking that energy from the bloodstream into the cells to be used? Enter insulin. It's the hormones. So how do we set this up in a way that is sustainable for us as a fasting lifestyle, fasting adaptation enthusiasts? How do we get there? Because insulin is the gatekeeper. It regulates blood sugar, signals cells to store or burn fuel. And it really decides whether or not you're going to tap in, shrink those balloons or those fat cells or not. So when insulin is off, you get energy crashes, cravings, your weight is stuck, especially if you've been on with your math equation, right? You've been tracking your calories, snacking, sugary coffee, late night eating, because you're less insulin sensitive at night, up to 30%. So insulin is like the lock on your fat cells, where fasting then gives you the hours where insulin comes down.
Yeah.
And the lock, insulin opens that lock and you can tap into those fat stores, right?
Yeah. I like to think about insulin as the gatekeeper to your fat stores. And it's not that insulin is bad. It's just that.
Yeah, thank God we have it.
Yeah, we would die without it. We
Any
absolutely
type
need
1
it.
diabetics out there know that it is actually essential for life, right?
Of course. And so as we trigger more and more insulin required over time because of potentially lifestyle issues, potentially genetic factors,
Lack of
and
movement, sedentary living,
absolutely
food choices, all that.
as we do that, we can become more insulin resistant, where basically the cells become a bit more numb, and then over time it could be a lot more numb to the signal. And so then they're not responding to the same concentration of insulin the same way. So it's taking more and more greater amounts of insulin being secreted by the pancreas due to any given nutrition opportunity, especially as it gets more into the higher carbohydrate, and then more processed carbohydrates hit that even worse, as far as the insulinogenic nature of whatever food that you're actually eating. And then you become calorie rich, but then very insulin rich at the same time. So then your body is shifted more towards calorie storage, fat storage, and that's okay because, well, in theory, calories in, calories out, you should be able to get those back out with just a small calorie deficit. But if insulin is still high, you just end up in a low calorie, high insulin environment. And that's where things get really tricky. And as far as metabolic adaptation, you essentially have calories everywhere, but then your cells can't actually tap into those calories. And so that's a real problem, because then biochemically you start shifting in other directions towards more of, hey, there's no calories around because they're not accessible to the biochemistry that's going on. And to hit on one other thing that you mentioned, Scott, I really like that you pointed out like the balloons from the birthday party, your adipocytes, because as we actually gain weight and as we're in more and more fat storage mode over time, not only do those balloons inflate, but our body can basically create more of those balloons, more adipocytes. So you have both fat cell hypertrophy, which is the growing of those fat cells, and then you have fat cell hyperplasia, which is the multiplication of those fat cells. And then we don't tend to decrease the number of those fat cells over time, which also is part of why after you've gained a substantial amount of weight, even if you've lost it, it can feel like you're able to gain it back much faster the next time because you have all of those balloons just sitting around. You don't have to go to the store to buy more balloons. You can just fill them back up very quickly. And so the body's very efficient at storing more fat after it's already done it before, which is also why we need to be vigilant and understanding that not only are we going to use fasting to burn through the excess fat stores now, but we're also going to continue to use fasting just in a different, more adapted way into our maintenance mode as well. We're going to stay vigilant through that process because we can't just reach the finish line, so to speak, as far as a number on the scale, and then just stop fasting. Otherwise, we're likely to go back towards what we were doing before, and we don't necessarily have to even do it as much or as drastically as before in order to gain that weight back or take multiple steps backward, which is absolutely not what we want for the long term.
And this is why the precision nutrition article, that we've referenced in the past, it talks a lot about the little nuances in between all the different reasons as to why the calorie in model or the hormone model work or don't work. Mm-hmm. But the biggest takeaway, is that it's not just about the calorie in, calorie out model. It's about some of your other hormone controlling systems, like your cortisol, your sleep, and your thyroid. So when we talk about fasting, if you've been in one of our challenges, we talk a lot about drivers of weight loss resistance or insulin resistance that aren't your food choices, like you were just talking about.
Yeah.
Right. That are sleep and stress. Right. Because if you've been fasting for a little while and you get a poor night of sleep or you're traveling, making those right decisions when it comes to your food choices and your fasting windows the next day are that much harder.
Correct.
And we know that hormonal output, your down regulation of your blood sugar management, your insulin sensitivity, and your body's ability to burn energy that next day does decrease. Right. So we can't just look at this, in one thing. We need to also talk about the stress amplifier. Right. So it's that fat loss is hormonal, not just the calories. So it's your response to stress, your circadian rhythm, your sleep, your chronic stress plus sleep debt will increase your abdominal fat, your higher blood sugars, your more cravings, your more inability to stick to your fasting windows and those air quotes good food choices that you're trying to make. Because acute fasting is a hormetic stress. It's a short-term stressor that builds resiliency over time. But if you're in a high-stress, low-sleep, over-caffeinated person, fasting is going to be difficult and it can potentially backfire for you.
True.
So you need to have consistent sleep and stress management, which is part of what we have inside of our challenges and our coaching and resources, because we found personally that's something that was one of the missing pieces in the calorie in, calorie out model for us.
Yeah. Oftentimes we need to be working on those other, like, I wouldn't almost call them like secondary factors, but really they're not. They're not secondary factors. They're just secondary usually in order of importance for what we think about. We think about the calories in, calories out. When we think about our fasting time, and these things are obviously very, very important. But the other things can be just as important, but oftentimes not talked about or in the right way, not standardized. Because just for example, on your sleep, one night of getting 6.5 hours or less of sleep, all of a sudden you're 20 to 30% more insulin resistant that following day. So what does that mean? That means already the calories in, calories out model is changed for the next 24 hours. Until you hit that next sleep cycle, you won't be able to reset that. And so what does that mean? That means that you could make the same food decisions, the same fasting decisions as you did the day prior, but because of that quote unquote poor night's sleep, and oftentimes our definition of poor night's sleep, it doesn't really trigger at the 6.5 hour mark, because for a lot of us, that's just kind of the standard, or that's what happens a lot of the time. But physiologically, it's not optimal. It means that your body's not behaving the same way under the same type of conditions. And so, yes, you can make some different food choices if you're aware of this fact and you're willing to accept that is an important factor. Then you can consciously make some compensatory changes the next day. Maybe I go ultra low carb or more carnivore the day after a poor night's sleep, so that I can really make sure that I don't need more insulin. I don't need more insulin secreted than I absolutely have to have. Or maybe I work on an earlier nutrition window that following day, instead of just trying to like rip the Band-Aid off with a burn day after a really poor night's sleep, because I know my likelihood for success is that much higher without trying to just do it all at once. And if I do it that way, then if I take 1 or 2 days with an earlier nutrition window after a really bad night's sleep, then I should be able to effectively do a burn day, maybe on day 2 or day 3, rather than an unlikely to succeed burn day attempt right after that really poor night's sleep. And so if I extrapolate those results over the long term, then one way I might be missing a lot of opportunities, and the other way I'm a little less aggressive on the approach, but with a much more higher likelihood for success over the long term. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And that's where we started the conversation, like, which one wins? Well, both. And why does it really matter? It doesn't. What matters is how you're feeling on a day-to-day and how consistent you can be, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the second thing that comes into equation, the big kind of pillar here that we need to talk about, is your truly your metabolic like thermostat, your thyroid. That's what's going to set your metabolic rate, your temperature regulation, your energy usage. So what happens with, chronic caloric restriction, yo-yo dieting. This is why we don't recommend long extended fast over and over and over again, because that's going to downshift your output and your sensitivity, right? So normal labs don't always mean optimal function, right? So if you've got cold hands or feet, rapid hair shedding, fatigue, brain fog, like that's meaning that there's something underlying there where your body's energy balance equation isn't working for you, right? So this is why we talk about making sure that we're prioritizing protein, that we're making sure we're coming out of ketosis, especially as women, childbearing years, perimenopause, menopause, making sure that you're getting out of ketosis and getting quality full nutrition days in, and not just stacking long extended fasts, which is the only thing that's going to move the needle. Now, in the short term, it's not going to do any damage, right, to your thyroid or your energy balance equation, but it's not a sustainable way. And if you get stuck in that pattern of, overeating, overfeeding on the weekends, and then just doing longer fasts, you're not really moving the needle. We want that consistent, foundational fasting efforts, where we truly believe that no one in the obese world that we live in, 75% of the population is overweight or obese, here in the States, that we don't really need to be eating 3 meals a day plus snacks. If you've got two main protein-paced meals in an 8-hour window, and you're getting in quality sleep and managing that stress response, then you're going to see fasting really stack the deck in your favor and move that needle for you.
Yeah, and it can also get you a long way towards where you want to go as far as fat loss goes as well, depending on exactly what your goals are there. Now, in plenty of instances, like for you and me, we needed a bit more fasting. But we did also see some results even, at the earlier stages with some of those like 16-8 type of windows. So, getting those right doesn't necessarily mean that you're changing all of your food choices, doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting a very different number of calories. Even if we go back through the literature that we review on many podcast episodes, what we end up seeing is a natural inclination for time-restricted eating to result in a modest decrease in the overall number of calories eaten without actually having to track those calories. And so there's a great benefit of simplifying the equation without being like overly or more vigilant with calorie counting or macro counting than you would see in a typical calorie in, calorie out type of therapy. And you're seeing a natural inclination towards reducing those calories, but not reducing the satisfaction from the foods. And so you're naturally getting in a few less calories only because you're not focused on eating outside of that predetermined window. And so it's great the way that it simplifies, but also leads you in the right direction, but then also controls the hormonal equation, which controls the cravings and makes it more likely that on any given day you're going to stick to the plan. You also have a higher likelihood of adherence on a time restricted eating type of schedule versus a calorie in, calorie out, where the adherence tends to stay lower and tends to drop off much more quickly than a time restricted eating. So, even in a recent review that we did, we saw time restricted eating up in the 87% plus range for 12 weeks of a time restricted eating. And that was on a 15-9 schedule. And what I thought was really cool was that in that experimental group, it started off that compliance was on average 5 days a week. And then in a matter of weeks, it actually rose up to 6 days per week. So Scott, you just mentioned like what happens on the weekend, because the weekend really it doesn't feel like that much because it's only 2 out of 7 days, but really it can start on Friday. Sometimes it can even start on Thursday. You can be getting into the 40 to 50% range of the actual week, especially if you take into account recovering from those weekend insulin spikes or those weekend opportunities on Monday. Sometimes it feels like we're still off track on Monday. So point being that if we can still just implement our foundational fasting on the weekend, we don't have to be overly restrictive with it, but we also don't necessarily have to just be full bore on the fat loss train on the weekend in order to get this right over time. We can just tread water on the weekend, insulin wise, and then we can really, get in some of those flame days, some of those, additional burning time during the week. That's going to be a great long-term success strategy right there.
So if we're talking about this like big picture, how do we kind of break this down into coaching or our challenges, or how we want you guys to implement this? Is really looking at kind of overview of like three phases. Is like we need to first lower insulin and get access to the stored fat, right? That's on the hormonal side of things. You're automatically going to put yourself in a calorie deficit with fasting. We've done tons of studies on that. You mentioned some earlier, that you automatically inherently just reduce your caloric intake. Then you're going to really want to look at like phase two, like what's the repair that stress sleep response. And I forgot to mention earlier, is one of the things we talk about on that Monday of day 6 of the challenges is that exercise, the type of exercise and when, because exercise is a hormetic stress as well. It can be positive, but it can also be negative, just like fasting. But if your sleep's in check and you're managing those day-to-day stressors well, then you're going to be set up for phase 1, which is lowering that insulin and tapping into those fat stores to become much more efficient. Right? And then phase 3 is the thyroid hormonal component, that long-term metabolism. So we want nutrient density, we want resistance training, we want intelligent, customized fasting strategies on what your fast should be day over day, week over week, which is why it's hard for us to answer the age-old question, what's the best fasting schedule? Well, the one that you can stick to and feel good with. Right? So it's really like a mini framework. Right? So the reality is, if you've never fasted, you snack all day, you're kind of stuck. That's the insulin chaos starting point. If you feel like crazy, if you fast like crazy and you kind of feel wrecked all the time, you wake up hungry and exhausted often, you probably have a stress and sleep issue, not necessarily a willpower issue. So the action plan off of today's episode, Tommy, would really be is like how do you identify the hormonal issue, the main hormonal issue for you? Is it more insulin? So constant hunger, carb cravings, afternoon crashes, central weight gain. Is it more cortisol and stress related? Exercise, sleep, life stress. Are you wired and tired, poor sleep, anxious? You've got the stubborn belly fat? Or is it more hormonal, thyroid, sluggish, cold, hair changes, weight gain when you're doing the same old things that you used to be doing on your usual plan? And then come up with a fasting strategy. So what's my fasting window going to look like? For insulin, it's going to be a minimum foundational fasting, 16-8. No snacks. Cut late night eating first. Move your eating window earlier in the day. If you're more in that cortisol, wired, tired, poor sleep, anxious bucket, you want to keep your fasting window shorter. Focus more on the sleep, prioritizing your sleep, consistent wake up, and bedtimes, right? And then possibly a shift away from, what was her name on the Huberman podcast? Molly Sims or Mindy Pell's talking about hanging up the running shoes and getting away from the high intensity boot camp type workouts and moving more into resistance training. That's going to be great to optimize that hormonal output. And then if you've got the hormone issue, the thyroid bucket, you're going to want to be doing more alternate day fasting or flexible fasting with really strong protein targets and resistance training. And then you're just going to track a metric for 30 days. Is it going to be the scale? Is it going to be your waist circumference? Is it going to be a pair of jeans that you put on and you're like, no, not yet. Or maybe I'll just keep these for a little bit while longer. How about your energy? Do you wake up hungry, tired? When do you see those energy swings throughout the day? And then how are your cravings been? How's your energy levels been? How's your mindset been? And really focusing some of those non-scale wins depending on which one of those buckets that you fit into.
Yeah, and I'm going to double down on the sleep bucket because I know for me and you personally, that was such a big issue. That was one where I knew sleep was important, but I would always default to the calories have to be much more important than the sleep. But if you just think back to going an hour and a half with suboptimal sleep, like 6.5 hours or less in a night, and thinking my body will be 20, 25, 30% less efficient the next day. I mean, what does that mean? It means on a 2,000 calorie diet, for example, it could be the difference between burning an extra 500 or 600 calories potentially, or storing them away. And if you take that and extrapolate that over a week, that would be over a pound of fat in a week. And then extrapolate that over the months and the years, you're talking about chronic sleep deprivation, quote unquote, which is what I just described, means that my calories in, calories out equation is already broken. My expectations are my reality is not going to be my expectations.
And then when your expectations don't match your reality, guess what you do?
oh yeah, you stop, you quit, you throw in the towel.
I'm raising both hands and feet, right? Like,
Right.
yeah, that's been me so many times.
Absolutely. So if you think that might be you or that resonates with you at all, then you can start there without going overly aggressive with your fasting or with a change to what you're doing fasting wise. Just draw a line in the sand for cutting that nutrition opportunity off in the evening time so you can protect the sleep and just focus on nothing else but getting better quality sleep. Try it for a few days, try it for a week, see how the scale responds without making any other changes to your fasting schedule or your eating choices. And it's likely to give you a higher likelihood and a greater ability to control what's happening on the scale. And then how you wake up the next day, your energy levels, then guess what? You feel higher energy, you feel more motivated, you make better food choices. You get up a little earlier and you have that morning walk or that morning workout, or you do it after work because you have a little bit more energy and you were skipping those workouts that you really wanted to do before. So all of a sudden you're accelerating the calories in, calories out equation rather than kind of getting used by it. And so that's where the hormones and the lifestyle and what we can control really can accelerate the process or really just slam it to a halt, right?
Absolutely. So in the end, we want you to win. We don't care if you're in the Seco world or the hormone world, or you're in your world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? My wife says this to me often. We're all in our own little world. Sometimes you seem like, I'm like, yeah, I'm good. I like to live in my own little world. I like to live in my bubble. She's the extrovert. I'm the closeted introvert, right? So yet we're on a podcast that's, worldwide, 5 million downloads, et cetera. It's like, oh yeah, I never thought I'd be here. This is kind of cool. This is fun.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it's about you. It's about you figuring out how to get traction, how to stay motivated, how to do the thing, how to turn consistency, the definition of consistency, from average day-to-day stuff into long-term excellence. So honestly, as we wrap up, Tommy, I love this conversation. Hopefully you can pick one or two things, identify those buckets, one or two action steps.
Yeah.
But to wrap up, like, fat loss is not about finding the perfect calorie number.
Yeah.
It's about creating that hormonal environment. We truly believe through tools like intermittent foundational strategic fasting, where the calorie equation and calories themselves finally work in your favor instead of against you.
Yeah.
And that's what we want for each and every one of you. So, Tommy, as you wrap up today's conversation, man, love it as always. And we will talk soon. See you next week.
Thanks. Bye. So, you've heard today's episode, and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com and sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.